Okay, Helen.
Okay, it's January 2025. Welcome, everybody. It's Dee Dee and Helen's Sped Ed office hours, and we're glad you can be here. And we're going to get started on what our agenda is for today. Today's topics include missing service minutes. If you are missing service minutes, or what counts for missing service minutes, when you have to make them up. Timeline for the new I almost said for the new IEP, didn't want to scare people. Timeline for new IEP after reevaluation, signing the ETR if not in attendance at the meeting, when to answer yes or no to Section 11 LRE. And naturally, we will take questions that you have for us that we aren't addressing. We didn't really, it's Christmas break. We hadn't had many phone calls and whatever. So we just came up with some things that are still kind of, we get questions about more often. So go ahead, Dee Dee, if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, if a student is absent on a day when they had scheduled intervention services, is the IS required to make up those missing interventions minutes? Okay. If the student misses because they were absent or taking a test, the minutes are not owed. If a student misses because they are participating in a school activity, assembly, field trip, community trip, the district does owe the student services unless you have put that in the IEP, and except for school activities like field trips, assemblies, parties. And I know probably at a well, it could be younger grades too, but I know some of our MH students are have more go out. Some can't talk. Often go on community trips to do life skills or work sites. And I'm sure that is listed in the IEP, but also a lot of times, at least for my students way back when, um, our extra people went out, our speech therapist, our OTPT also went out on the work site to see them. So they were getting their minutes in. Okay, if the student misses services because the service provider was not available, absent attending a meeting, the district does owe the student the services missed. I think most people understand that, but just reiterating, yes, you do. If a student misses services for any reason to the point that they may not receive FAPE, then the IEP team needs to convene to determine compensatory services. So, anybody have any questions, any comments on that? Dee Dee, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered everything, Helen. The big thing is, there's the differentiation between when you do and do not owe. But I'm glad you brought up that last point that no matter what the reason is, if a student has missed an excessive amount of minutes to the point that they're not receiving FAPE, it doesn't matter if it's the student's fault or the district's fault. The team has to decide if that is the case, then you do want to provide compensatory services.
Right. Okay,
Okay.
I see nothing in the chat, so
Okay.
okay,
Thank you, Helen.
great. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've been asked this question quite a few times that if you do a reevaluation for a student and there are a lot of changes that would need to be made, well, first of all, we want to say clear up a little bit of a misconception that if the IEP is still within the duration of its life, there's a misconception that you always have to write a new IEP when a reeval is done, and that is simply not true. It's not even a best practice. If the IEP is still appropriate to meet the student's needs, then you do not have to write a new IEP. What you do have to do is you have to look at the information from the new ETR and make a decision whether or not it substantially changes anything in the IEP. If you may just need to make a few tweaks and amend it. You may need to write an entire new IEP if it's substantive. But if the changes are very minimal and it doesn't impact the services that you already have outlined, you do not have to write a new IEP. So that's just a free extra that you didn't ask for. But then this question does come up, that what happens when you do the reevaluation and there are substantive changes that need to occur. So there are meaningful changes to how the child is serviced, and you need to write a whole new IEP. Um, do you have 30 days to do that? And the answer is yes, as long as the IEP is still within its lifespan. 30 days is the reasonable expectation, or sooner. Of course, if the IEP is going to expire before that, then you've got to complete it in time so that you're not exceeding the expiration date. And again, this is something that is not spelled out in the operating standards, but it is the common guidance from OEC that, you 30 days is an appropriate amount of time if you're going to rewrite the IEP. But again, bear in mind that this is not a new IEP. This is a renewal. So you are on that 364-day clock no matter what, irregardless of when the evaluation happens. So if that IEP is going to expire sooner, then you've got to make sure that you write it to stay within that time frame. So hopefully that makes sense. Anything you wanted to add, Helen?
No, I think you covered it, and we do get questions though about this, but and we do, and exactly what you said. You have to make sure that the IEP is not going to expire before that 30 days. So I think you said it, Dee Dee,
Okay.
and I don't hear or see any comments or questions. So
Okay.
thanks. I'm
Okay.
gonna, yeah, go ahead.
So this is another one that there's quite a bit of confusion around. And I've heard from some districts that they have a policy even within their district that if a service provider completed or contributed to a part one, but they did not attend the meeting, they do not have them sign the ETR. And that is absolutely not correct. You should not be doing that. Um, OEC expects that everyone who contributed to the ETR and is part of that ETR team is supposed to sign, even if they weren't in attendance at the meeting. Please remember, there is no excusal for the ETR, and you are not permitted to use the IEP excusal form. So if a service provider or a teacher is not going to be attending, then they have to give the parent their portion, just like you do with an IEP, and connect with them either in person or virtually or over the phone to go over the assessment and their portion, their part one, to allow the parent to ask questions. So in theory, I guess you could email things, but I would really caution against doing it strictly through email, because you have to make sure that you are giving that parent the opportunity to ask questions, to get clarification, and to have some conversation. So again, you are going to have that person sign, um, before the meeting or after the meeting. And that's going to be captured in your PRO1, that the parent had that section of the ETR in advance. They had an opportunity to discuss it with the provider. And then that team member is going to sign and date whenever that is. The PRO1 also shows why, that person wasn't present, but that they signed it either before or after the meeting. And what Helen and I can tell you is that during IDEA reviews, when a district is under review, that is something that the monitors do look for, and they will call that out if there is If there are people who did not sign the ETR, they're questioning why. It is never an issue if people's signatures are dated on different dates. The state understands that everybody isn't necessarily going to be there, and then that document has to make its way around to everyone to get signed. As long as the PRO1 says who was in attendance and who signed before or after, they're absolutely okay with that. That's what they're looking for. Helen, anything you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted to say you're right about what the monitors look at on the ETR with the signatures. And I think this has been confusing. I think it has been confusing. I think people think, maybe in the past too, like if they weren't there, they can't sign. But you're exactly right. So if anybody has any questions and wants to put it in the chat or unmute, feel welcome.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, so our last question um, comes around Section 7 and LRE. The first question most folks feel pretty comfortable with that says, does the student attend a school that they would if they did not have a disability? That's pretty straightforward. And I think most people feel pretty comfortable with that. The second question sometimes can be a little disconcerting and confusing for folks. And the question really is, wait, let me go back to the previous one just so I can show what the question was. That if a student is getting all their core instruction in a gen ed setting, but then they have an additional period of support with an intervention specialist, should the district mark yes or no in section 11? And many districts have gone to a model like this where they have what they call, lots of different names, but basically a no new instruction period. And, different districts give it a different title, but it's basically an intervention period. There might be gen ed students still present in there. It might be a supported study hall, but students may be getting some of their SDI delivered at that time, or they may be just getting additional help. So it can be confusing in, are you answering yes or no to that second question? That second question is, does this child receive all special education services with non-disabled peers? So the easy way to think about this is take that question at face value. Even if they have one of those supported study halls or, whatever it's called in your district, and they may be receiving some of their SDI at that time, if it is not a removal from gen ed peers. So it's either happening with a gen ed teacher and an IS, like in a co-taught setting, or even if it were a supported study hall, if there's an intervention specialist, but there's, an equal amount of students without disabilities, then you could still say yes to that. If the student is receiving any amount of special services separated from their gen ed peers, then you have to say no. So if all core instruction takes place with non-disabled peers, but then they have an additional time for support with an IS, you can say that. So you're sort of showing that, hey, the student is receiving all core instruction in all core content areas in a gen ed setting with non-disabled peers. But in addition, the student is removed, for one period per day for intervention and blah blah blah, whatever it is. So if they have like a supported study hall or something like that, but they are removed from their gen ed peers, then it's a no. So the only time you can really say yes is if truly they are not being separated from their non-disabled peers, and you have your numbers are what would be naturally occurring. So it's not like you have two gen ed students and a room full of students on IEPs, that would still be a no. But if you have natural proportions, and they're not being removed from that gen ed setting, then you can say yes. Otherwise, you're saying no, but you can still make it clear that they're getting all their gen ed instruction with uh or they're getting all of their, excuse me, they're getting all their core instruction in a gen ed setting with non-disabled peers, but then you're explaining that that extra time for intervention is a removal. So you're marking no. So hopefully that made sense.
Okay, that was quick. Like I said in the beginning, we've all been on Christmas break, or most of us, I hope. Um, and we hadn't received much. We know the week leading up to holiday break, and during most of it, we don't hear too much from directors. Uh, so we kind of went with some questions that had been nagging, like in often a month or so before, and maybe if somebody it was one or two around the same type of question, but it varied just a little bit. So that's really all we came up with because right at the moment there is nothing new yet. Um, but we will open it up for you to ask us questions.
Happy
Hello
New
there.
Year's, ladies.
Hi.
It's Liz. How are you?
Oh, good.
Good. I have a question.
Hmm.
We are in the throes of transitioning from special services to same goal. Kind of
Okay.
happened really fast.
Hmm.
Everyone's like in a panic. But of course, we have progress reports that are due. And one of the things that I have drilled with our staff in terms of progress reports is having like that narrative if a kid's not making progress, what are you doing? Tracking if they're making regression.
Right.
The new progress report in Same Goal, maybe there's somebody else on here that uses Same Goal. There's no place to put any kind of narrative like that at all.
Hmm.
So what we have done is we've created almost like a key of
Hmm.
like making progress, goal met, goal not met kind of a thing. So they can have some kind of a indication of how they're doing on the goal. But I just didn't know what the guidance was in terms of progress reports in documenting a kiddo that's like maybe regressing and what's the expectation in progress reports now? Because we got to figure out a way to put that stuff in this progress report. I don't know where it's going to go, but what's the guidance on progress reports and what are they looking for?
So a couple of ideas for you. Um, and this is not the first time something like this has come up. And obviously, as software providers go through new reiterations of what those documents look like, sometimes they need feedback from the
Right.
field on what's needed. So it's certainly worth a phone call. I can tell you that the folks there are pretty receptive to hearing from the field that, hey, this is something that's required by the state, and then they will make tweaks. But you mentioned creating a key.
Yeah.
Lots of districts do that. That's not a bad
Yeah.
idea. So you can
Yeah.
absolutely do that. There is a place where you provide the data points where you have to put like, for the goal for the student, you're putting like what type of data was collected and you're putting those data points. So you're
Uh-huh.
able to type in there. You could put a statement right there.
Yeah, and that's what they've been doing. It's different and it's we're just trying to get the views down and I don't know. I just didn't know they still expect us to put statements in there saying, all right, the progress they made regression, or do they still want those kinds of statements in these progress reports?
I mean, I think it's best practice. There's
Right.
Okay.
nothing that says that you have to do that. What you have to
Okay.
do is you have to provide data points and show,
Right.
the progress that the student is making.
Okay.
But ultimately, the other thing to think about is if you have a student who, as you're saying, is not demonstrating progress, well,
Mhm.
what's going to happen is that's going to prompt the IEP team to convene a
Right.
meeting and make a decision about whether you need
Right.
to amend that IEP, if you need to change up the goals, if you need to change the
Yeah.
criteria, if you need to look at accommodations, all the things that we know
Right.
could happen. And that's going to be captured in a PRO1.
Right.
So,
Right.
I guess I would say as a best practice, sure, because a parent's going to see that
Mm-hmm.
they may need some kind of narrative around what does this mean.
Yeah.
And so, and here's the bottom line is when forms don't dictate what we do. So
Right.
if a
Right.
form isn't user friendly and there's not a space, you put it where it fits.
Right.
If you've got to put it in where the data points go, that's
Right.
okay. What's
Right.
important is that the information is in there. And
Right.
that's certainly what the department would say is,
Okay.
okay, we'd much rather it be there and be in a spot that wasn't designated for that than it not be there at all.
Right. That's
And
pretty much what we're trying to get them to do. And
exactly. So,
we're
but
go ahead.
it's not an absolute requirement that be in
Okay.
there. The
Okay.
requirement is, and you already know this, is that you're capturing the data, you're you're giving the progress, and then you're doing something about it.
Right.
And so, like I said, you would be meeting with that parent or connecting with that family to make a decision as a team on what needs to happen if the student isn't making progress, or the opposite, if they mastered something early,
Right.
be doing the same thing. So you're going to
Right.
have captured that
Right.
information somewhere else in the PRO1, in the amendment section of the IEP, in the other section or the profile, whatever. You're going to have
Okay.
it captured somewhere else. So I wouldn't sweat that too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
We are having them include what the baseline is for the goals, so it's very obvious where the kids started and where that progress is leading throughout the progress report. So that's one thing that we are having them add is what the baseline was for the goal that's in the present levels.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
that's good.
Okay.
sometimes it becomes a little bit like the narrative
Yeah.
for some of your kids that are more involved. But
Yeah.
the only thing, since you have done this, you might get a little bit of questions from families just because they're used to the narrative. But like Dee Dee
Yeah.
said, if you can put it somewhere else, or if they're
Yeah.
calling, um, you're doing what you need to do.
Right.
But yeah, you were. Yeah, we used to provide more of a narrative in a lot
Right.
of different cases. So, and
Yeah.
just like Dee Dee said, the state will always say forms don't dictate. But
Right.
I also know it
Well,
becomes a little bit of an error.
we've been told over and over, and these are ODE approved forms. I'm like,
Yes, I
okay,
know.
all
Yeah, because I
right,
just
you
had
sure
another
do.
conversation about a different thing, but I think it was the same software. And when they said something about something was dropped down for transition, and I said, no, you would not
Yeah.
say that. And it's like, well, it says right here. And I said, no,
Mhm.
you would not say
Yeah.
that. This is what, but it might not have been from the software itself, but it was a
Right.
decision that was made.
Right.
And, but yeah, some software programs, like Dee Dee said, we even as a state, but like you said, it's adopted by the state, have
Hmm.
there have been phone calls made to say,
Yeah.
hey, you're going to have to incorporate something else for this.
Don't get me wrong. Our staff is like, I like this progress report. You have to.
Well,
It's way done.
certainly they do.
Of
And
course
I'm
they
not
do.
knocking your staff. It's just,
I
yeah,
know. I get it. It's all good. It's all good. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you,
so
Lisa. I appreciate it.
never a bad thing to connect with the software provider and say, hey, this is just something that would be helpful. And if enough people have that suggestion,
yeah,
usually they will tweak it.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's never a bad idea. There
Yeah.
was another question in the
yes.
chat about any updates on the forthcoming new iteration of the IEP. And no, we still do not have a timeline. We were hoping that it would have been out for public comment by now, but there was a little bit of holdup for that. That we had initially anticipated that was going to happen in the fall, and it didn't come to fruition. So we do not have any kind of update. We will certainly announce that when we do. But again, please remember that the process is first it will go out for public comment, and then it will go back to legal before it becomes finalized and is rolled out for use. So there was never an expectation that it would be rolled out for use before next school year. We're
Now, there was a little expectation for that because I was told that and like 2 summers ago and said the following fall,
well,
but
yeah,
there were some glitches and it had not gone out for public comment. So I'll just say it won't be out. I'm not going to say this year, but I kind of doubt it, but it won't be out before the end of the school year. I'm confident in saying that.
yes, and
Yeah.
I thank you, Helen. What I meant was, like Helen said a couple of years ago, we thought we would have had it for this school year, but this year we knew we weren't going to have it, for use this school year. We thought that it was going to be out for public comment in the fall, but there's a little bit of a hold up with that. So, we're very confident that it will not be rolled out for everyone to be using until next school year. And we'll have to see when it gets put out for public comment. And hopefully still be able to be ready to go for the 2025-2026 school year. But again, when we get updates, we certainly will pass those on and let everyone know.
Yeah, and just to kind of ease your mind as what we're hearing right now, except for the transition section. I mean, it will incorporate the same things. You have to meet indicator 13. It may look a little different. The IEP may look a little different, but most of the updates from what we're being told are things that get confusing or aren't in the right place, like the testing page, you know, third grade guarantee. Do you mark this box or no? It's supposed to make things clear or more succinct. At least that's what we're being told. So I don't think there's going to be major, not like quite a few years ago now, not like when the the way the IEP is now, that was a major change. So I don't think I get too concerned yet. I shouldn't have said
Exactly.
yet.
No, that's a good point, Helen, that this should be just a way to make some things a little cleaner, a little clearer, nothing too earth shattering. So we don't anticipate anyone having too hard of a time with it.
Yeah.
I have a question. Are they really going to release profiles next week?
Well, we can answer that.
We
Um,
we
go,
are we're hopeful. We are
yes,
optimistically hopeful that profiles will be released. Again, we cannot say definitively, but we're
right.
all kind of waiting with you in,
Hmm.
in anticipation of that. And that's what we're hoping.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to be sarcastic. I was just trying to be realistic because we, like Dee Dee said, we are on that same wavelength, but as soon as we know, we'll let you know, or you may know before we know.
I'll let you know.
Yeah,
We're
okay.
we're all anxiously awaiting and planning our support too. So we're kind of all chomping at the bit waiting for the release as well.
The other question I have is just or a comment that all boards have to adopt new model policies and procedures by
Ah,
March. And
Yeah,
then,
yep.
unlike before, where they adopted them in 2004 and never looked at them again, they
Yes.
now have to be repassed, or, resolutions have to be done every year
that is
going forward,
correct.
starting in the fall. Yeah.
That is
Okay. I
correct.
wasn't sure if it was every year or every 2 years, but yeah, I think it is every year.
And remember the districts have the option
To do their
to
own.
to do their own or to
Hmm.
use the one that the department put forth as a model. But if they opt to do their own, they have to include all that same information and make sure that they meet that same standard. So, yeah, so, and that is a local decision that districts will make, but you're absolutely right. That is something that every district does have to have in place, and they have to be board approved and adopted. So, you're correct.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do we have any other questions, or do we want the recording stopped for some other questions?
I'm sorry, for the model policies, did you say that has to be adopted annually now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So just some evidence in the board meeting minutes that it was done.
Yeah, I would assume. I think there's a little more maybe coming out about that. We just heard a little bit yesterday. Well, we probably heard a little bit before that, but we had our special ed TBT meeting and there was some conversation. So until I look at everything, I don't want to speak out of turn. Dee
It's
Dee?
my understanding that you have to have signed minutes with the resolution each year. So we'll see.
Yeah.
And that's what how I understand it as well, is that once those policies and procedures have been adopted,
Right.
that then it would be a matter of annually the board again just showing exactly what you said, that they've been reviewed and that they've been agreed upon and passed again. So it would be reflected in your board minutes.
Right.
And of course, as Helen said, as more guidance or more support or any additional clarification becomes available from the department, we will certainly pass that on and try to help, with any questions that we can.
Right, because that's just not going to be special ed. That's going to be everything.
Exactly right. That's not just special education. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, we are going to thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to stop recording. If anyone wants to hang out and chat about anything else after that, certainly you are welcome to, but we're going to officially close this session of office hours and also remind you to join us next month. Office hours will be on February 12th. Those will also be in the afternoon at 1 p.m. And then in March, it'll flip to the 9 a.m. one, like we usually do through alternating. Remember that you can sign up on our events calendar right on our website. And this recording from today will be available sometime by the end of the week or the beginning of next week on our YouTube channel. So again, we want to say thank you, everyone. Happy 2025. And we will look forward to seeing you all next month.
Yes, thank you.